Hello everyone, my name's Josh and today I'm going to be talking about placement year and how to secure one in 2025. Now, hopefully you will know this already, but placement years are, I would say, more competitive than ever. But if you watch this video in its entirety and follow the guidance I will provide, I'm confident that also give you the best possible opportunity of securing a placement. And if you stick around until the end of the video, you'll find out about how you can secure a one-on-one coaching session for free with me. And I'll touch on shortly why would you want that and why would you care about that. Now, this video is going to be an extensive, long video, and I make no apologies for that. I'm really going to go into detail. So what I'd suggest is you watch it through once in its entirety just to understand the steps that you will expect to follow, but then come back to it and revisit it as you're going through your placement journey to skip to the relevant section specifically that you're at and follow that at the right time for you. Now, I'm assuming if you're here, you already know the benefits of a placement. I'm not going to go through that and cover that today. But what I will say is, for me personally, it kickstarted my career and it's the reason I am where I am today. So it's absolutely valuable and really does set you apart, and you should spend and invest the time to achieve one. But before we get into it, firstly, I want to cover what sections will be included in this video. So firstly, we'll start with searching for a role, where to start and how to search. We'll then look at preparing your CV and application forms, then psychometric tests, assessment centres, interviews, and finally, hopefully, the wonderful task of deciding which company or role to go with and accept. But before we get into it, I should probably address the question you're hopefully asking yourself right now, which is why should you listen to me and watch any further? And to address that head on, I'm not a career advisor, although they can be great. I'm certainly not a recruitment consultant. Thank God. But I've got real world hands-on experience. And just to demonstrate that, I've built a successful corporate career, progressing from a graduate to a senior manager within 7 years at a global technology company. So I can confidently say I have the experience to back up what I'm saying. And I've also spoken at numerous external events on career advice, career discussions, around placements, graduate schemes, and so on. I've coached and mentored numerous students and early professionals applying for placement years, graduate schemes, and whilst on those graduate schemes. And I've also been on both sides. So not only have I been interviewed for a role, but I've also been the interviewer, the hiring manager that has interviewed and managed interns, apprentices, placement students, and graduates. So I've really seen both sides and I understand what they're looking for. And for me, the reason I'm talking about this is because my career progression really started with a placement year, and I know more than anyone, I would say, the value of that and what it contributes to your progression and your experiences. So I'm really passionate about sharing that with everyone. Let's get started then with searching for a role. And there's two fundamental ways to approach searching for a role. And that's either, is there a role specifically that you know you want to do, such as a consultant or a seller, or is it a specific industry or company you're interested in working for? And based on that, what I would recommend first of all is just having a general search using Google, using places like Rate My Placement and your career advisors at university to create a shortlist or a tracker and sort that tracker by the deadline for the application or submission date for the role. Now, you may be in the position which I was in when I was searching for a placement, which is I didn't really know. And what I would say is that's okay, right? It's not the end of the world. You won't know straight away immediately what you want to do. But how you start to find out what you want to do is by attending uni talks, for example. Hopefully they'll be holding presentations where companies come in and tell you about that. That's how I got interested in the company I ended up working for and still am today. You can also look at reviews from current placement students and so on. So really start searching as early and as soon as you can. Now, my advice around this is don't take a scattergun approach and just sort of search and shortlist or apply for everything and anything, right? You're wasting your time if you scattergun and just see what sticks to the wall. You really need to be selective of ones that you're genuinely interested in, because that will then come out in your passion that you show during the application process, okay? So once you've created a shortlist, go through and then do some high-level research on the company on the shortlist. So have a think and research what the culture of their company is like. What is their strategy? What are their values? What does their annual report say? And I know this is time consuming up front, but this will help you understand if you really are interested in this company, and it will also be helpful for the remainder of your placement process as well, right? So that research will be reused throughout the remainder of the research of the placement, as you're progressing. Let's now move on to preparing your CV to apply for those roles. And we're going to talk about CV and application form interchangeably here. But how you should start this is really create a baseline standard CV, no frills, just Word document, capturing all of your key experiences, information you want to demonstrate and get across to the reviewer, and all the extracurricular stuff, which is really going to make you stand out as well. And you can then use your careers department at uni to review your CV and to give you feedback and really refine that. And then you may think that's it, but it's not, would you believe? Because that's just the standard, right? That's to get you in line with everyone else who's applying. What you then need to do is make it stand out in a professional way. So what I would recommend is using the likes of Canva, where you can get a free trial, and use their CV templates to actually make yours stand out a bit more. So use one of those templates. Include a headshot as well, so a headshot, a photo, professional photo of you to include, just because then it gives a face to the name and someone to actually recognize for the reviewer, as opposed to just loads of text. Also, make sure your personality shines through in your application form and your CV. I know that's easier said than done, but really just think of the reviewer who is reviewing hundreds of CVs or application forms. They want to see something slightly different, and different in a professional way. Let me just include that as a caveat. And now, hopefully at the end of that, you will then have a standardized CV that is standing out through the use of a slightly different template and adding all those additional bits to, again, make it stand out. And then what you'll need to do is when you're applying for each role, you need to then take that standard CV and cater it to the company, role, and industry you're specifically applying to in that instance, okay? It's not enough just to create one CV and send it out to loads of companies. You're then going to have to edit it to reflect the role, the responsibilities, the values of the company, because then it will resonate more, and the reviewer, again, will be more likely to pick you out of all the others, okay? And this is where all that research that you did in the previous section as part of searching for the roles and companies will help, because you can use that and just add in some values, make your experience more relevant to the roles and responsibilities as an example, and that will set you in a good stead moving forward. Okay, so you've found your companies and roles that you want to apply for, you've created your CV or transferred it into an application form and submitted it, and hopefully you're now starting to slowly get some responses back. And the responses you'll likely be receiving are requesting you to complete a psychometric test. Now, a psychometric test is a mix of maths, English, logic, and situational tests. Now, really, the reason for those, in my personal opinion, is essentially just to create a funnel approach where they reduce the amount of CVs they're having to review. Because in reality, a human probably hasn't actually reviewed your CV by this point or application form. They will wait until the psychometric test is done. If you pass, they will then look at it. And that's purely to reduce the numbers that they have to look through, okay? So my advice here is practice, practice, practice. Use the free online tests, of which there are many online, that will help you prepare. Use your careers department, who hopefully will be able to provide you with some as well. But really, I can't stress this enough, practice and prepare for this, because I can speak from personal experience where I underestimated how difficult these would be, at least for my simple brain, and I failed several, and that was not a great experience. So again, invest the time up front, get some practice in, and that will help you pass them, no doubt. Now, in terms of the situational test, there are actually two approaches to these tests that you can take. The situational tests really are trying to understand if you align with the company's values and you're the sort of person that they are looking for to take on in their company. Now, there's two ways you can approach this. You can either answer those questions how you genuinely really feel, or you can answer the questions based on how you think the company wants you to answer. And that's really, again, can be based on the research that you've done already as to what you think the company want to hear. Now, that's a decision for you ultimately, right? Some people will tell you to answer honestly because it's helping you if you're not the right fit for the company. However, if you're really adamant you want to secure a placement, I would suggest thinking about what the company wants. Although you can never fully predict it, right? It's not as simple as you may think. So just take the time, go through the questions. They're usually timed for each of those psychometric tests, whether it be maths, English, and so on. They'll be timed, there'll be a percentage they're looking for you to score, and you'll usually get a response within a couple of days once you've completed those. You also, by the way, will probably have a deadline to complete those of like up to a week. So you're going to need to block out some time once you get those to prepare and complete them. And a tip from me, or not a tip, but maybe something to consider is if you do fail the psychometric test, definitely don't apply again under a different email address with the same CV and retake the test, because that definitely won't work. Definitely didn't for me. Moving on. Next up, assessment centres. Now, if you've reached this stage, that's firstly a very good sign because it means you've passed the psychometric test and your CV has also been reviewed by a human at the company who's decided that you're suitable to progress to the next stage. So that's all really positive signs and something to pat yourself on the back on, but not to get complacent with, because this is really where it starts to get fun. So the purpose of an assessment centre, first of all, is to assess how you interact with others and how you behave in a pressured environment and really what kind of person you are, to be honest. Now, this is the first time you'll likely have been face-to-face with the company, so it's also an opportunity for you to form an opinion yourself on what the company is like, the people who work there, and it's also probably the first time that you're meeting with people who are also applying for the same role as you. Now, it tends to involve the assessment centre 1 or 2 scenario exercises, which we'll talk about shortly, and sometimes either a presentation or an interview. And this really depends at this stage based on the company itself. I'm approaching it as if you're applying for a large corporate company with a really clearly defined an established placement program, right? So these are going to be the more difficult and challenging ones. It may be slightly different if you're applying for a small, medium enterprise. Now, first of all, first piece of advice, do not treat it like The Apprentice, because it's not. And having been an assessor and observing people in assessment centres, you'd be amazed how many people walk in with a shiny 3-piece suit, which is a personal bugbear of mine, and act arrogant and they're trying to compensate, right? But they're going too far the other end of the scale, and it's doing them no favours. As an assessor, ultimately what we're looking for is people who can collaborate with others, build a rapport with new people, and people who are logical and observant and respectful and switched on, right? It's really not rocket science as to what we are looking for. The harsh reality is, as an assessor, and as I've alluded to, we make opinions very quickly, as do all human beings, right? It's within our nature to do so. So you have to make the first impressions count, and don't, as I said, be rude, be arrogant, just be respectful, don't be too loud. There's a balance and a happy medium to everything. And for some of you, it will come more naturally than others. But just know that everyone is in the same position as you. Everyone is nervous. Everyone is unsure what to expect, right? So really, you are on a level playing field, but you should watch this video to improve your chances. Now, it is normal to be nervous, but you need to try and put yourself at ease as soon as you can when you arrive there. The way you should do that is by building a rapport with the other candidates. Speak to them, find things in common with them, right? Just to calm yourselves down. And also identify people that you can actually work with during the assessment centre, right? Because you can both succeed together. At assessment centres, it's not usually 1 of 12 get through, it's multiple usually, right? So give yourself the best possible opportunity by building rapport early on, not just with the other interviewees or candidates, but also the assessors themselves and the facilitators. The facilitators will probably be current placement students or early professionals as well. So you can also get to understand from them their experiences and try and utilize that information as well. So another great opportunity for you. But with all that being said, I'm going to contradict myself here, don't get too comfortable, right? Try and put yourself at ease, but there's a difference between being calm and collected versus comfortable, because you're ultimately not at the pub, right? I have seen examples where people get too comfortable too quickly and they're chatting too much, and very quickly it becomes like they're at the pub having a chat with someone they've just met. That's not the reason you're there. You're not there to make friends, but you're there to build relationships with people, to help you and to demonstrate your adaptability. With that in mind, let's talk about the scenario exercises now. And again, these will differ obviously based on the company themselves, but usually you'll be split into groups and you'll be given some form of a brief to review with an objective or an outcome and a time frame to complete this. Ultimately, it is important to try and get to a conclusion and achieve the outcome, but it's not the end of the world if you don't. I've seen teams who don't achieve the outcome that's required, but because they're working so well together and they're demonstrating everything we're looking for, they are still successful. So, first of all, read the brief and make sure you don't miss anything. And identify or note down information that you feel is important. And also, make sure that you've not missed anything. And the reason I say that specifically is because of my own experience. It turned out that the briefs we'd received all had slightly different information, and it was me that actually identified that that was the case. So that was already immediately a tick in the box for me, because everyone was rushing to get started and I'd identified that people had slightly different information and we had to use the different sheets to build a collected understanding. So that's the sort of thing to think about, that maybe they're trying to catch you out or to see if you pick up on things. Next up, I've seen it every time I've assessed. The first thing someone will do when the timer starts is someone will jump at the opportunity to say, I'll keep track of time. Now, that is helpful, yes, but it's such a given that it's almost like if that's the thing that you're thinking about firstly, it kind of doesn't impress me that much as an assessor at least. So if you're going to keep the time, fine, but actually do that, right? Prompt the team that we've got 5 minutes left, we've got 3 minutes left, and make sure that we're clear that we're progressing, right? Don't just say it for the sake of it. It's not helping anyone, and it doesn't really benefit you in any way, I would say. Next up, work with the team to progress and actually ensure you are progressing, right? And what I mean by that is you can talk for 10 minutes and just go around in circles and everyone wanting to speak and actually not progress with the brief or the task you've been set. So make sure everyone has a chance to talk, but at a certain point, you're going to need to move on, make a decision and move on and continue, right? You may not all be in agreement, but you have to do that. Now, my advice throughout these situational exercises is try not to speak over people, try not to be rude, to be arrogant, and also try to give people the opportunity to speak who maybe aren't speaking much. What I mean by that is think about people who are maybe slightly more introverted, who may be really analytical but not confident enough to speak up or speak out over really loud personalities. If you spot that person, ask the question, what do you think, or do you have any thoughts? Because ultimately, what that's showing the assessor is that you are collaborative and you're inclusive, right? So these examples I'm giving you specifically are things to think about that will get you a tick in the box or a mark against your name. So really think about that. And if you do disagree with someone, don't be afraid to say that, but say it in a respectful and polite way. So if the scenario is, for example, someone states something as fact and you don't believe that's the case or you disagree, don't just say, no, you're wrong. The way you should approach it is say, look, I'm not sure I do agree with that. What does everyone else think? Should we take a vote on it and progress with the majority? Okay. That way you can progress, you can demonstrate that you aren't always in agreement, but that you're respectful in that approach. What I would say in terms of general advice is try and lead the team, keep them on track and focused on outcomes, right? We're looking for leaders, not people who are loud and speak over people and just dominate conversations, okay? There's a difference between the two. And if people are being dominant or loud or arrogant, don't get pulled into it. Just let them shoot themselves in the foot, right? Because as an assessor, very quickly, we will just, give them a cross against their name. It doesn't look good on them, and you don't need to be pulled into it, right? Just avoid that in its entirety. Ultimately, show your personality. Don't be quiet. be respectful, don't be loud. As ever, it's a balance and a happy medium between those. And I think you will be able to find that balance quite quickly if you bear those things in mind I've just talked through. The last thing to say is I've seen a lot of people who attend assessment centres who are just quiet and just sit in the background and don't really contribute anything. And as an assessor, we can't mark you if you've given us nothing to mark you against. So you do need to find the opportunity to speak, to give your point of view and your opinion in a respectful way, but you have to do it, okay? Don't be afraid if you're really struggling to edge yourself into that conversation. You have to, because otherwise it's only damaging your own opportunity. Next up, presentations. So, presentation. This will either happen on the day of the assessment centre, as I mentioned earlier. It may happen once you've passed the assessment centre, or it may not happen at all, right? You may go straight through to interview. Great if you do, but if you don't, presentation is the next step and next thing to consider. So the presentation will usually be a topic relating to the company or the role that you've applied for. You'll usually be given a brief ahead of time as to what the topic is, the time you've been given to present, and all the information you need to prepare, okay? Now, firstly, a reminder, I'm going to go back to previous sections at the start where I recommended researching the company and the role. You can use that research again as a starting point for this presentation, okay? Now, when you first get that brief, what you really need to be thinking about first of all is what is it they're wanting, what is it they're asking for, and what is the message that you're trying to get across within this presentation. Think about it in this approach. You need to have a point of view and an opinion on the topic, and you need to create a story around it and use that for the basis of your presentation, okay? You want to use this as an opportunity to show you understand the company, the culture, the values, the domain and the topic, and you also want to use it to demonstrate your personality and ultimately your knowledge, right? The worst thing you can do is be robotic and just talk them through or read aloud information with no context or opinion that they will already know, the person you're presenting to, or will have seen multiple times already with other candidates, okay? Again, this is all about making you stand out and going that next level in terms of detail and knowledge, okay? What I would say is once you've created that point of view, that opinion, and that story arc, now think about how you're going to tell and communicate that as part of your presentation. Let's say you have 10 minutes to give that presentation, okay? What you need to think about is being articulate and concise in the story and the messaging that you're trying to tell, and not talking too quickly, and ensuring that there's a balance, okay? So you're going to be nervous giving a presentation on a topic that you realistically won't know potentially too much about, but you will have developed that knowledge in front of someone you don't know, especially with the stakes being potentially a role and a placement year, right? The person you're presenting to knows all that as well. They know you're going to be nervous, and in all likelihood, they want you to do well. You know, nobody wants to be sitting there experiencing a painful, awkward, poor presentation. We want to enjoy it as well as the person being presented to. So what I would say is when you're creating that presentation, think about the style, the visual that you're giving alongside what you're communicating as well. So avoid lots of images, right? I've seen loads of presentations where people just get images off Google search and it doesn't look professional. It looks like you're a student at uni, and you need to remove that from the back of their mind. So avoid images or random square images as much as possible. Also, avoid using lots of text, because ultimately you're using the slides as a prompt for yourself, but also to highlight the key point and message you want to get across. Do not use it as a script. Do not create a slide full of text, because as the person that's listening to the presentation, I've got to read the text and listen to you talking at the same time, and that's going to distract me and pull my focus from one to the other. Okay, so really think about what are the key things. Even if it's 2, 3, 4 bullets a slide, that's absolutely fine. Just think about what is the message of that slide, what is it you're trying to convey, and what is the outcome of that slide. Now, in terms of a tip for preparing for the presentation, my advice, and I do this myself all the time, is voice record yourself presenting, because you can then listen back and identify where your tone may be slightly wrong, or you're talking too fast, you're over on time. And it also will help you, by listening, it will help you memorize your script and the key messages. So actually when you get there, you don't need cue cards. You don't need to read the text on the screen. You already know the fundamental message that you're trying to convey. And that gives you the opportunity then to, again, be more personable and more like it's a conversation rather than talking at someone, okay? And encourage questions and discussions with the person that you're presenting to, right? Because again, if you involve them more, they will remember that as well when they're looking back later on at the end of the day. So practice, practice, practice is where we'll leave this. You know, don't just do it once. Practice presenting to other people, right? It's awkward, it's painful, it's not fun, but I'd rather practice and mess it up to a friend or family member than the assessor who's deciding whether I go through to the next stage or not. So really get that practice in, don't be afraid, and voice record, go through it multiple times, and you'll be fine, I have no doubt. Because if you're good at presenting, it really makes you stand out. So this isn't just a skill you need to apply for a placement role, you will need it throughout your career, and the earlier you get better at it, the more it will help you. Here we are then, the final stage, the interview. Now, if you've made it this far, first of all, congratulations. And I don't just mean this video, I mean the process itself, because it is no easy process, right? We've all gone through that pain by this point, and whether you've made it this far or not, and whether you're successful in the interview or not, you've still gained a wealth of experience that will help you in the future with future application processes. So don't forget that, no matter the outcome. Now, with that in mind, this is the final step. So this is the culmination of all that work, all that research that you've done, and this is really your opportunity to demonstrate why you're the right person for this role. So give it your all, okay? Do not leave anything out there. I could come up with some football manager quote, but I won't, but you get the point. So the interview itself, it's usually a mixture of domain and industry questions alongside competency and behavioural based questions. And I'm going to talk you through shortly what that means in reality. But before we get to that, let's think about preparation. So you'll receive an email from the company inviting you to an interview. It will either be face-to-face, or since COVID, they are doing more virtually, which is not a bad thing in the sense of you're able to be comfortable in your own environment, whatever works best for you. But really, when you've received that and you've received a time and date, you should be focused on that from that point onwards, right? Do not leave it till the last weekend. So firstly, start by refreshing your memory on the company, because it could have been a while between the assessment centre and this interview, or you applying, right? This is not necessarily a several week process, it's a several month process. So refresh your memory on the company in terms of the research you've done previously, the strategy, the values, the culture, the role and responsibilities. Use that prior research as a starting point, but then you need to go one step deeper now, right? You really need to understand in more depth the company because you need to be able to demonstrate that knowledge in the interview. Also, have a look at other interview feedback from people who've been through this process already with the company. So Rate My Placement is a good example. There's forums, Reddit, all sorts, where you can go and search and find out what people who've interviewed with this company already this year or prior years, what was the experience like, what were the sorts of questions they're asking. Try and give yourself any edge or advantage by getting as much information ahead of time as possible to prepare for. Hopefully that's pretty obvious, but we're going to state the obvious things at this point. Next up, if you know who your interviewer is, which hopefully they will give you the name ahead of time, look them up on LinkedIn, right? Understand what is their background, what is their experience, what is their role, because that will also help you with building a rapport with the interviewer. And you'll notice I've said rapport throughout, because to me at least, the type of person I am, it's really important to build a relationship and a rapport as early and as quickly as you can. So by understanding their background, their role and experience, when you meet them face to face, you can have that small talk before the interview and really build that rapport, which ultimately makes you feel more comfortable and at ease, but also shows to them that you're really genuine and serious about this because you've gone that extra step. Side note, by the way, if you don't have a LinkedIn, I should have mentioned that as step one before anything else. Make sure you have a LinkedIn because it will help capture all of your experience in one place, and the companies will likely look for you on LinkedIn as well. So make sure you have that. Right, let's get on to the questions themselves, and we'll start first of all with the domain and industry questions. This is really giving you the opportunity to demonstrate the wealth of knowledge you have within, would you believe, the domain and industry. So I'm going to bring it to life with an actual, an example question. Let's say you've applied for a consulting role within a technology company. Generative AI, clearly very topical at the moment. So they may ask you, tell us about the impact that generative AI will have on the consulting industry, okay? And the way you should approach this to really make it stand out as an answer is, first of all, give your own opinion and point of view, because as I've said throughout this, that is really important to make you stand out. What is your opinion? What do you think about this? And then take that and apply it to the company or the industry. Next up, competency or behavior-based questions. So these questions ultimately are around your own experiences, right? So think of it as tell me about a time, or give me an example of a time when you've demonstrated X, Y, and Z. So the example competencies they may ask you questions about is trust, teamwork, adaptability, those sort of generic ones you'd really expect at this stage, right? And the way you should prepare for this is, first of all, have some examples for each of those generic competencies or behaviors you're likely to expect. So have an example for a question around trust, have an example for a question around teamwork, and so on. And the advice I would give here is use different examples and try to avoid uni as much as possible, because for me at least, uni tends to be pretty poor examples. If you can relate it to volunteering, extracurricular stuff at university, not like group work, for example, or part-time jobs, that's going to help you stand out as well. And it's going to be more valuable, meaningful example. Now, how you should approach the question itself, there's a really nice format that you may have already heard of, but I will always go on about, and it's how I approach every answer to an interview, is the STAR method. So the STAR method is the following. It's the situation, so what were the situation that you found yourself in? The task, so what were you tasked with doing specifically? The action, so what action did you take, specifically you as an individual, not the team? And the result, so what was the outcome of your actions? So situation, task, action, and result. It's a really nice way to frame the question, frame the answers to the question, and it gives it that structure that's needed rather than jumping from here to there. Now, advice and general tips I would give to answering interview questions, whether it be competency or domain-based, is first of all, give yourself the time to process the question, right? If you're not clear on what the question is, ask them to repeat it. I've seen interviews where questions have been really wordy and they've actually been multiple questions within a question. So don't be afraid to write them down, don't be afraid to ask for them to be repeated, and don't feel you need to answer instantly. And this is a common pitfall that I fall into, is I want to answer immediately. I want to demonstrate that I already know what the answer is. But what that means is I'm actually trying to formulate the answer as I'm talking, which is not a good approach to take, right? So give yourself the time, if you need, to formulate an example and an answer before giving it, okay? And the last piece of advice I would give on interviews is don't waffle. Don't feel you need to talk for the sake of it just to fill silence. You want to be concise and articulate and clear. If that just so means that you've answered a question within 30 seconds, don't be afraid to stop, but ask them if they'd like you, to go any further or deeper on the answer, okay? Put it back on them, but don't be afraid to stop, okay? The worst thing you can do, in my opinion, is talk and talk and talk and not know when to stop. What you should also be doing is preparing your own questions. So there will be a stage of the interview at the very end where they will likely ask you if you have any questions for them, right? And either the majority of people will say, I don't have any, I think you've answered them, or they will have a really rubbish generic one around start dates or something that's forgettable that everyone will ask. So this is again your opportunity to stand out and make a lasting impression. So think about meaningful questions to ask. So for example, a good question might be, what's the biggest challenges I'm likely to face in this role if I were to get it, right? Something that makes you makes them think as well, makes the interviewer think, make them feel a bit uncomfortable, right? It's, you know, it's not, the spotlight's not just on you. The question may be something around, what's the company's strategy moving forward over the next 5 years? I've done a bit of research, but there's not much out there. Where do you see the companies going? Or if there's been something really significant in the news recently, as long as it's not a negative thing, by the way, but, you know, how do they see that impacting the role or the company or the area of the business? Just think of something a bit more meaningful. Have a couple of questions in the back pocket and make sure you ask them. Again, it just shows a level of maturity and experience that probably the other candidates being interviewed won't necessarily have. So that's it. That's the end of the interview. You've asked your questions that you've prepared at the end. You usually leave an interview firstly feeling exhausted, but secondly, don't expect to walk out of the interview feeling that you've smashed it and you've done really well, right? Quite often you will probably not feel that, and that's okay. I don't think anyone really comes out feeling I've nailed that 100%, I've got everything completely right. And if you do feel that, I'll be honest, you probably haven't got it, because you're probably so far away from what was actually required that you've just completely missed the point. So don't worry if you feel that you haven't answered all the questions as good as you could have. All you need to do is have done well enough to go over that threshold or that percentage mark they're looking for. And as long as you've prepared as well as you feel you could have done, then that's all you can do. And whatever the outcome, again, you've gained that experience and that will help you no matter what in the future. And you may have thought that was it, that's the end of the process, but it's not, because there is a final step, which is the decision. There may be a scenario where you've got multiple offers, and that's a lovely position to be in, right? A wonderful dilemma to have, but you need to then make that decision as to which company or role do you go for. And it can feel quite significant, right? It might mean living in one city versus another. It will mean meeting a completely different set of people. It is kind of a crossroads moment where it could have a significant impact on your life without going too deep and meaningful. So in terms of making that decision, alongside a gut feeling you may have, and I would always say go with your gut, right? If you've got a bad vibe from the company or the interview or something like that, that might be enough to sway you. But apart from a gut feeling, think about the following considerations in making that decision. The company itself, is it one that you want to work for, or the brand you really resonate with? The role specifically, is it the role that you're really interested in, more so one than another? The industry itself, are you interested in working in a technology company versus a fashion brand? The location, do you want to be in London? Do you want to stay in the city you're currently in? Do you want to go abroad? All sorts of things to consider. The salary, I mean, salary is important. You need to live, right? Especially if you're living in London, you need a good salary. And the opportunities you'll have whilst you're there. So is this a role where you're going to be sat staring at a spreadsheet for 12 months? Or is this a role where you're going to be able to go out there, meet people, build your own eminence within the company? And my parting comment or advice would be, think about a placement year as a 12-month application form to a graduate job. Because a lot of the companies that you'll have a placement with will have a graduate scheme. And quite often, and it was the case with myself, I was basically fast-tracked through the graduate application process, straight through to final interview. I didn't have to go through the assessment centre or all the other things I've just described, majority of which are applicable for graduate schemes as well, by the way. And so really, I used the placement year as a application form to the graduate scheme. It worked out well for me, so always have that in the back of your mind. Securing the placement is only the beginning, right? Then you've got 12 months to get as much as you can from it. And there we have it. We're done. That's it. The end. You've made the decision. Hopefully you've secured a placement, in which case, congratulations. And I have no doubt it'll be an amazing year. So make the most of it. Enjoy it. You're going to have a fantastic time. And thank you for watching. If you have found this video helpful, please consider liking and subscribing and all that wonderful YouTube lingo. But if you want an additional incentive to do that, then I'll be selecting 3 subscribers at random to give a one-on-one 30-minute free coaching session with. It can be on placement search, it can be on general career advice. So if you feel that this has been helpful but you'd like a bit more individual support, subscribe and I'll be selecting 3 people to coach. Thank you so much, have a great day and see you soon. Bye.